Inside ADX Florence, the most secure prison in America, deep in the barren deserts of Colorado, beyond the empty highways, the ghost towns, and the jagged mountains that slice open the horizon, stands a place Americans were never meant to truly understand. A place designed not just to lock people away, but to erase them from the world. They call it ADX Florence. But inside the system, it has another name, the Alcatraz of the Rockies, a fortress so secure that even the sound of another human being feels illegal. This is the place where the United States hides the prisoners it fears the most. Terrorists, cartel lords, spy assassins, bomb makers, the men who can start wars with a phone call, a message, a whisper, and yet, buried beneath the concrete, beneath the steel, beneath the endless layers of security, lies something far more chilling. Not everyone who enters ADX leaves with their mind intact. Some never leave at all. Tonight, we're going inside the world's most secretive supermax, a place where doors never open all the way, a place where silence is a weapon, a place where time itself feels like it has stopped moving. And before this story ends, you'll hear about the prisoners who cracked, the guards who walked away broken, the experiments with isolation no one talks about, and the terrifying reason some believe ADX was never built for justice, but for control. If you're new here, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear is the kind of story that makes governments uncomfortable. This is ADX Florence, and these are the secrets buried in its concrete, the prison built from fear. To understand ADX Florence, you have to go back to the early 1990s, when America was drowning in panic. High-profile prison murders, cartel uprisings, inmates manipulating guards, ordering hits, running empires from inside their cells, killing so violent, so public, that politicians demanded one thing: build a prison no human could ever escape. Not physically, not mentally, not socially. A place that crushed every instinct to rebel. And the result was ADX, often described not as a prison, but as a factory of isolation. It wasn't just made of concrete. It was made of psychological warfare. The architects didn't design cells. They designed silence chambers. They didn't design yards. They designed concrete boxes where sky is a privilege. Every angle, every steel door, every slit-sized window was engineered for one purpose: to break the idea of escape before a prisoner even tries. Inside these walls, inmates can go years without touching another human being. No handshakes, no pats on the back, not even eye contact. Guards speak through intercoms. Meals are delivered through mechanical slots. Even recreation, the 1 hour a day when inmates are allowed outside, often happens in what's basically a cement tomb with fencing overhead. They call it the cage. And for many, that cage becomes the closest thing to freedom they will ever know again. Who gets sent here? ADX is not for ordinary criminals. It is reserved for the men who terrify even other criminals. The Unabomber, the Oklahoma City conspirators, leaders of deadly street gangs, cartel bosses who ordered executions like morning routines, spies who betrayed nations, extremists who launched mass attacks. Every inmate in ADX has a backstory drenched in violence. But violence alone isn't enough to end up here. To be sent to ADX, you must be someone the government believes cannot be controlled elsewhere. And that's where this story gets complicated, because among the infamous names are men who insist they were sent here not for what they did, but for who they embarrassed. Whistleblowers, political cases, high-profile inmates who expose corruption, people who claim ADX isn't a prison. But a warning: the arrival. When an inmate first arrives at ADX Florence, the transformation begins immediately. The moment the bus doors open, a silence hits. Cold, surgical, unnatural. Prisoners describe it as stepping into a place where even the walls are listening. Guards here are different, trained differently, think differently. There's no shouting, no chaos, no threats yelled across corridors. Everything is rigid, rehearsed, almost robotic. New arrivals are led through multiple chambers, each one sealing behind them with a metallic thud. Visitors say the sound is so loud it makes your ribs vibrate. Inmates' fingerprints, irises, and voices are scanned. Clothes are replaced. Chains are tightened. Then the door to their new world opens. A 12 by 7-foot cell that will become their universe. Inside, everything is built to withstand violence. Heavy checkmark concrete bed. Heavy checkmark concrete desk. Heavy checkmark concrete stool. Heavy checkmark steel sink. Heavy checkmark shatterproof mirror. Heavy checkmark a window too narrow to see anything except a slice of sky. This is where they will eat, sleep, think, dream, scream, cry, and slowly come to terms with reality. Most will spend 22 to 23 hours a day inside this room. For years. For decades. Some for life. What isolation does to the mind. Here's where the story shifts from the physical to the psychological. Experts say that a human being begins to unravel after 90 days of extreme isolation. In ADX, some inmates have been isolated for over 20 years. Prisoners report hearing voices, not from other cells, but from inside their own heads. Some develop phobias, fearing even the sound of footsteps because it breaks the routine of nothingness. Others start talking to insects they find crawling near the light fixtures. Insects that sometimes aren't real. One former warden famously said, ADX is built to make people go insane. And the worst part is, it works. But the government denies this. They call it necessary control, a tool for managing the most dangerous individuals alive. So the question becomes, is it punishment or is it torture? And that debate will lead us deeper into the darkest stories ever recorded inside ADX Florence. The architecture of control. Most prisons are built to hold people. ADX Florence was built to control people. Every hallway, every reinforced slab of concrete, every steel bolt is part of a master design, a system created not just to contain bodies, but to dominate minds. In most prisons, inmates outnumber staff. In ADX Florence, the building itself is the rail guard, motion sensors, laser surveillance, fiber optic pressure alarms built into the concrete, steel doors that lock with a force strong enough to snap bones. The architects designed a fortress where human unpredictability, the greatest fear of any correctional officer, is eliminated, replaced by mechanisms. But perhaps the most haunting feature is the silence engineered into the facility. No echo, no ambient human noise, no footsteps bouncing off walls. Just quiet. One former inmate described it like this: it's so quiet you can hear your heartbeat. Then after a few months, you begin to wonder if it's really yours. This silence isn't a mistake. It's a psychological environment, a pressure chamber. Because in ADX, the idea isn't just to prevent escape. It's to make escape unthinkable. The men who run the mountain. ADX Florence sits alone in the desert, but the men inside shape global history with their violence. Here's a cold truth most true crime documentaries avoid. Some of the most dangerous people on Earth don't die in shootouts. They die locked in concrete, buried alive but breathing. And ADX hold the highest concentration of such men anywhere in America. Drug lords who built empires that stretched across continents. Domestic extremists responsible for mass casualty attacks. Leaders of international terror networks. Prison gang shot callers whose word is law in entire cities. Some of these names are so infamous that the government almost never speaks them publicly. But one thing unites them. They cannot be allowed to communicate with the outside world. Not by phone, not through coded letters, not through guards, not through other inmates. Because one message, one phrase whispered through a vent, could cost dozens of lives. And that's why ADX is a place where the government's message is brutally clear. You will never influence the world again. But this absolute control comes with a dark shadow. Because sometimes, when you strip away every human connection, you create something far more unpredictable. Something feral. Something unhinged. The human mind hates cages. And inside ADX, some minds have shattered spectacularly. The cell that doesn't sleep. Most people imagine prison as loud. Voices. Shouting. Metal clanking. Arguments swirling through the bars. ADX is the opposite. In this prison, Inmates don't sleep when they want to. They sleep when their bodies shut down. Because every cell has what guards call the eye, a small reinforced glass window that allows staff to watch an inmate at any time. Some prisoners have said the eye is always watching. Others swear it moves. Some say it blinks. But the truth is simpler and more disturbing. You never know when someone is watching. You only know that someone can. And that uncertainty slowly poisons the mind. Former inmates report feeling paranoid, constantly scrutinized, constantly evaluated, constantly judged. Some stopped sleeping altogether. One inmate wrote, "I stopped dreaming. It's not that the dreams were bad. It's that I could no longer remember what a dream felt like." Another said, "At ADX, your thoughts echo louder than any voice." And yet, the government calls this appropriate supervision. So which is it? Safety or psychological erosion? The answer depends on who you ask. The routine that destroys time. The daily routine inside ADX is so repetitive, so unchanging, that it breaks the human sense of time. There are no clocks, no sunlight patterns inside cells, no human voices to mark the hours, no yard conversations, no work programs, no communal meals. Imagine living in a place where your entire day looks like this. 7 a.m., breakfast delivered through a slot. 11 a.m., lunch delivered through a slot. Afternoon, alone. 5 p.m., dinner delivered through a slot. Night, alone. Tomorrow, exactly the same. Next year, exactly the same. Next decade, exactly the same. Many inmates describe it as the endless day, a life without markers. Even weekends lose meaning. Holidays vanish. Birthdays fade. One psychologist who evaluated prisoners at ADX wrote, "After enough time in solitary, the brain stops measuring life in days. It starts measuring life in meals. And when you reduce a human life to meals, something inside begins to split. The men who lost themselves." Some of the darkest stories from ADX are not about violence, but about the quiet, slow collapse of the human mind. Inmates have been found talking to shadows, screaming at reflections, writing letters to people who have been dead for years, begging guards for anyone to talk to. There are documented incidents of self-harm, so disturbing they were sealed from public record. One former guard recalls a man who spent 6 hours whispering apologies into the drain of his sink because he believed there were people listening on the other side. Another inmate paced his cell 10 hours a day, every day, until the soles of his feet bled through the skin. And yet, many of these men were sentenced to time in prison, not time in isolation. But ADX makes no distinction. Here, every man breaks eventually, some slowly, some suddenly. But the human mind is not bulletproof, not even in the hands of hardened criminals, criminal masterminds, or terrorists who once stared down governments without fear. Inside ADX, everyone is vulnerable. The first signs of cracking. Guards at ADX are trained to recognize early signs of psychological cracking. But here's the problem. Almost every inmate shows signs. Some stop eating. Some hoard food. Some talk to the lights. Some refuse to speak at all. Some become obsessed with tiny details. The pattern of the walls, the sound of vent, the shadow of a window frame. Others begin writing endless letters, not to be sent, but to simply exist. One inmate reportedly wrote the same sentence 3,000 times. "I am still here." Another filled every inch of his cell with drawings, mazes, symbols, faces distorted in impossible ways. But the most terrifying cases are the ones who appear normal, until they snap. In ADX, the most dangerous thing isn't rage. It isn't violence. It isn't rebellion. It's silence followed by sudden, explosive collapse. And many guards will tell you, the scariest men in ADX are the ones who stopped screaming a long time ago. The prisoners the government fears most. When people talk about ADX, they often mention the names. The infamous, the notorious, the men whose crimes shocked the world. But what gets forgotten is why they're here. ADX is not simply a warehouse of dangerous people. It's the final stop for inmates whose influence is considered a national threat. Some are here because their followers would riot if they escaped. Some because they built empires from behind bars. Others because they cannot be allowed to communicate with anyone ever again. In most prisons, even the worst inmates eventually find ways to connect. A coded letter, a corrupt guard, a smuggled message. But ADX is built specifically to kill influence, to separate human beings not just physically, but socially, politically, and ideologically. And that's why the inmates here fall into a few chilling categories. The traitors, the terrorists, the masterminds, the uncontrollables. Men whose actions changed the course of entire nations. Men whose crimes were designed not just to harm, but to terrify, yet for all the evil ascribed to them. Even these inmates have stories of a different kind inside ADX. Stories of regret, stories of delusion, stories of minds decaying inside unending solitude. Because even monsters are still human. And ADX was not built to forgive humanity. It was built to erase it. The hidden corridors. Visitors see only the outer shell of ADX Florence. But beneath the surface, buried under layers of steel and concrete, exist corridors few civilians have ever walked. The prison has multiple security levels, but only one truly matters. C-Unit, the deepest, most restrictive section of ADX. Some call it the tomb. Guards call it the deep freeze. Inmates almost never speak of it, because those who end up there rarely return. C-Unit is where the government places inmates considered unmanageable, irredeemable, or too dangerous to house anywhere else. Here, the lights never fully turn off. The temperature is kept slightly colder, enough to keep inmates restless, but not enough to violate regulations. Every sound is amplified. Every movement is monitored. Cells in C-Unit are designed with concealed escape-proof engineering, including pressure sensors under the floors at register weight shifts. If an inmate simply stands up too fast, a guard in the control booth knows instantly. This section is where the U.S. isolates the minds it fears most. Not the bodies, the minds. And some inmates who spend time in C-Unit said something that still haunts psychologists today. In C-Unit, the prison feels alive, like it breathes with you, like it's waiting. Whether this is paranoia or the result of extreme sensory deprivation, no one knows. But the legends continue. The guards who walk the line. It's easy to focus on the prisoners of ADX, but the guards who work here, they live another kind of nightmare. Many correctional officers have confessed that ADX changes them too. They are trained to be calm, detached, rigid, operating like surgeons in an operating room where one slip-up could cost lives. But the silence, the slow, heavy silence, does something to a person. Guards have said that working at ADX is like walking through a library full of ghosts. One officer recalled, "You hear nothing, but you feel everything." Another admitted, "I would go home and sit in my car for 10 minutes before going inside. It felt wrong to hear my kids laughing. It felt foreign." Some quit within months. Some last years. A few last decades. But everyone who works here carries a shadow home with them. A heaviness. A weight. A feeling that they've touched something cold and ancient. Something beyond justice. Beyond punishment. Something mechanical and relentless. Because ADX isn't just a place. It's a system. A machine designed to eliminate unpredictability. And humans, guards or inmates, are not built to function inside machines forever. When violence breaks through the steel, ADX Florence was built to stop violence, to reduce it to zero, to make conflict impossible. But even in the most secure prison in the United States, human rage still finds cracks. There have been attacks in ADX. Rare, but spectacularly brutal. One inmate managed to fashion a weapon from a sharpened toothbrush and a piece of metal from a sink. Another ripped off a piece of his light fixture and used it as a blade. Some have used their own bodies, charging at guards, smashing into walls, banging their heads until blood flowed. And then there was the most infamous incident of all, the one involving a cartel-affiliated inmate who somehow acquired enough contraband to build a weaponized shank nearly 8 inches long. He managed to hide it for months, evading scanners, strip searches, and random checks. When guards finally discovered it, they asked him a single question. How did you get this? His answer? I didn't get it. I made it. Even in the strongest prison in America, even inside a concrete box, a determined mind can still find ways to create chaos. And ADX knows this, which is why the punishments for violence here are unlike anything seen in any other prison. Some inmates who commit violent acts are moved into conditions so restrictive that human contact becomes a rumor, not a reality. The underground whispers of escape. ADX is considered inescapable. No one has ever broken out. No one has ever come close. And yet, there are whispers inside the facility of inmates who tried, inmates who planned, inmates who believed the impossible might be possible. One attempted escape involved a meticulously crafted rope woven from bed sheets and clothing fibers, hidden beneath a false wall of toothpaste and paper. Another involved a prisoner who tried to dig into his floor using a piece of metal chipped from the underside of a sink. He tunneled for months, but made it less than an inch. There are rumors of more audacious ideas. Flooding a cell to short-circuit the electronics, using mirrors to manipulate camera blind spots, even starving oneself enough to slip through a food slot. Every attempt has failed. Every planner has been caught, because ADX Florence is designed with one terrifying premise. The prison is smarter than you, and it waits for you to try. The men who wait for time to end. Time behaves differently inside ADX. In most prisons, even the toughest inmates cling to routines. Yard time, conversation, card games, workouts, arguments, alliances. But in ADX, there is no rhythm, no structure, no markers to hold on to. For some inmates, the only thing that exists in their world is waiting. Not waiting for freedom, not even waiting for death, just waiting for something, anything, that might break the monotony. One inmate reportedly counted the number of concrete bumps in his cell wall. Another memorized the patterns in the ceiling paint. A third claimed he spent months tracking dust particles in a sunbeam. Some would savor the smallest disruptions. A new guard, a different meal, a sudden noise in the hallway. One prisoner wrote, "The best day of the month is the day they wax the floors. Just knowing someone is out there, pushing a machine, makes me feel like the world still exists." This is the psychological core of ADX. The world becomes a rumor, and the human mind begins to fracture under its own weight. The truth about the cage. The recreation area in ADX is not what most people imagine. There are no open fields, no grassy yards, no group activities, no basketball games or weight benches. Instead, inmates are escorted in full restraints to a small concrete pen, often described as a dog run or human kennel. Guards call it the cage. The cage is an outdoor box about the size of a walk-in closet. Concrete floor, concrete walls, a metal grate overhead that shows a sliver of sky. That's it. This rec time is the only moment many inmates see the sun. And even then, the sky is not truly visible, only glimpsed through a net of steel and wire. For most inmates, recreation is done alone. No companionship, no conversation, just breathing in the dry Colorado air while staring up at a sky they can't quite reach. One inmate wrote in a legal complaint, "The birds can fly above me, but even the birds look like prisoners through the wire." Some inmates refuse rec altogether, not because they don't want it, but because the transition process is so dehumanizing. The strip searches, the restraints, the escort teams, the handcuffs, the chains, the door slams. For some, the 5 minutes of sun isn't worth the ritual of being moved like a dangerous animal. And so they stay in their cells, day after day, year after year, because in ADX, even freedom feels like another form of punishment. When reality stops feeling real, isolation does strange things to perception. In interviews and court filings, former inmates describe hallucinations that blur the line between imagination and madness. Some hear voices, not angry or threatening, but familiar, comforting, like a friend calling their name. One man claims he heard the voice of his childhood dog. Another swore he smelled his mother's cooking in the air. A third said he saw someone sitting at the foot of his bed, a figure no one else could see. Most chilling of all was an inmate who insisted that his cell was shrinking. Every day it gets a little smaller. One day I'll wake up and there will be no room left to stand. Psychologists call this derealization, when the mind begins to reject reality as a survival mechanism. The brain, desperate for stimulation, creates its own world, its own sounds, its own memories, its own illusions, and ADX becomes less a prison and more a haunted mansion of the mind. Because when you're trapped in a concrete box for years, your thoughts are both your only companion and your worst enemy, the silent standoffs. In most prisons, disputes are loud, shouting, threats, noise echoing through the tiers. But in ADX Florence, conflicts often happen quietly, because an argument can only occur through walls. Inmates cannot touch one another. They cannot see one another. They cannot get within stabbing range. So disputes become psychological, territorial, symbolic. One inmate might start banging on his wall. Another responds. A third joins in. Soon the entire tier becomes a silent war of rhythms. Anger expressed through vibrations in the concrete. Sometimes it escalates into hunger strikes. Sometimes into self-harm. Sometimes into total silence. A blackout of communication that leaves guards wondering when the next explosion of rage will hit. And then there are the standoffs with staff. Guards say the most dangerous inmates in ADX are the ones who smile politely, follow every rule, and never raise their voices. Because in this place, compliance can be camouflage. There was a case of an inmate who spent years behaving perfectly, only to suddenly attempt to attack an officer without warning, moving with a precision that suggested he had been rehearsing the moment in his head for months. This is the unpredictable nature of extreme solitary confinement. You never know what is brewing, behind a pair of calm eyes, in a room where no one else exists. The lost letters. Mail is one of the few lifelines inmates have at ADX. But even letters here are subject to crushing control. Every piece of outgoing mail is read. Every incoming message is scrutinized. Every envelope is opened, scanned, documented, stored. For inmates with no family, letters become a kind of ritual, a testament that they still exist. But many letters never arrive, not because they're intercepted, but because the inmate simply stopped writing. One man wrote, "I ran out of people to talk to." Another, "My sister stopped responding. I don't blame her." A third inmate, who once wrote 3 letters a week, eventually sent none. Why? Because after 12 years in solitary confinement, he felt he had nothing left to say. Perhaps the most tragic is the story of an inmate who continued writing letters to his mother. Even after she died, he knew she was gone. He understood it logically. But in his mind, the letters were not for her. They were for himself. A final connection to a world that had forgotten him. Thousands of these letters are never read by anyone. They sit in storage rooms, filed away, slowly yellowing with time. Ghost messages. From men the world buried alive. The last door that, inside ADX Florence, time doesn't pass. It circulates, like stale air trapped inside a sealed vault, like a memory you can't escape, like a sentence that doesn't end when the clock stops ticking. For the men who vanish behind those concrete layers, the steel, the sensors, the silent corridors, the outside world becomes a rumor, a faded story someone else remembers. And maybe that's the piece that stays with us the longest, that for all the headlines, all the crimes, all the fear, ADX isn't just a prison. It's a place built to erase. But behind every thick wall, behind every locked door, behind every 23-hour, a-day isolation cell, there is still a heartbeat, still a mind trying to understand itself, still a story nobody has fully heard. And maybe, just maybe, that's why prisons like this hold such a heavy shadow over America. Because they don't just contain the country's most dangerous people. They contain the darkest questions we still don't know how to answer. How far is too far? What does justice look like when fear becomes policy? And if a place is designed so no one ever escapes, does the truth ever escape either? If you found yourself thinking, questioning, imagining, If you felt that chill run up your spine as we walk through the belly of America's most secure fortress, then stay with us. This channel is where stories like these breathe, where hidden corners come to light, and where the walls talk, even when the world swears they don't. So before the final door closes, before the lights dim, before we leave ADX Florence behind, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves deep crime documentaries, and subscribe for more stories that the world tries to keep locked away. Thank you for watching. And remember, some prisons keep people inside. Others keep secrets inside. ADX Florence does both.